What's up, coach? Today I'm sitting down with Alex Effer and we're talking all about how to build your program, your training model based on a virtual assessment. Are you ready? Let's get started. What's up, coach? I'm Beverly Simpson. I'm the owner of PT Profit Formula, the host of the PT Profit podcast, and the founder of B Simpson Fitness. And today I'm rolling an interview that I did for the podcast early on with Alex Effer, all about how to build your programming and build a training model based on the virtual assessment. So if you like this video, go ahead, hit like, hit subscribe, and tap that bell to be notified when the next greatest video comes out. So I'm sitting down with Alex and he was sharing with us all about how he has had to modify his business and pivot during these times, but still remain in integrity with the patient, with the client, and build an efficient program based on a virtual assessment. And he's going to break that down all for us today. So without further ado, let's go ahead and roll that interview. Hey, Alex, thanks so much for joining me on the show today. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Yeah, thank you. I really appreciate you having me, and I'm excited to get started.
I'm really excited to get all of your work out into the world because honestly, you are brilliant at what you do. So just for a little bit of background based on how I always start my podcast, can you share with us a little bit about who you are, who you serve, and how you got there?
Yeah, no, again, appreciate you saying that. So I'm a exercise physiologist and strength conditioning coach out of Toronto, Canada. I started getting a bachelor's at University of Toronto, playing sports all my life. So I loved getting into sports, and I played a lot of hockey, rugby, soccer. I was exposed. Luckily, my parents exposed me to a bunch of different sports, so I was able to really integrate myself into different type of skills. And that made me love sports. And so I wanted to play professional hockey as a career, but as a lot of people, they're just not good enough. And the reality is in Canada, because the sports aren't as well funded as the States, the ability to actually go into professional sports, it was a harder route. And it's just the money's not there to support the training and the travel and stuff like that. So, but what I did though is, because I would get hurt quite a bit, I actually gained a lot of appreciation for physiotherapy and strength conditioning. And so what I decided was, I'm going to get to the NHL a different way. And I'm going to do so by maybe doing more of the strength conditioning and physio route. Now, in university, I did a lot of internships with physio clinics, and for me, it just wasn't something that I was super passionate about, because I think my experiences skewed it a little bit. I worked in this one physio clinic that we had a professional baseball player who tore his rotator cuff. Right next to it, we had this 80-year-old man who also had a rotator cuff, and they're following the same protocol. And back then, I really didn't understand enough about anatomy and movement to know that that was wrong, but I just felt that, if this person's a professional baseball player, they should 100% be getting a different protocol or program this other person. So it's just too cookie cutter for me, and just too, constantly the same situation. And I wanted to be more of a dynamic situation. So what I did is I got my exercise physiology postgraduate degree, which is kind of like an in-between from a strength conditioning coach and rehab. Because in Canada, what that allows me to do is I can't put my hands on people. It's kind of like that, like a personal trainer can't, or a strength conditioning coach can't. But I'm able to work with pain, which in Canada, personal trainers typically need to refer out. Not that they can't deal with it. It's just, that's just kind of how the system works. So I wanted to work with a certification that provided me with less obstacles, so I can work with generally everybody. So cool thing is I started actually working in a neurological clinic, working with stroke, MS, paraplegics, quadriplegics, and that provided me a great insight into kind of how the neurological system affected movement, and very small movements. And then I went into the collegiate setting. I was working at the University of Toronto here, which is essentially would be equivalent to like a D1 school, where I oversaw the entire return to performance program. Whereas because at the school, they had strength conditioning staff and they had rehab staff, but they just weren't on the same page. So the strength conditioning coach would kind of do their thing and the physios would do their thing. And there wasn't really a cohesive integration of, the athlete moving through this process of returning to performance. So I was kind of in there, bridging that gap, so to say. So bridging, and that's really kind of where I found, what I was passionate about, which was understanding the rehab side, understanding the strength conditioning. So not just about lifting heavy weights all the time, which has its purpose, but more so understanding how movement works, how breathing works, how breathing can be integrated, how gait can be integrated into selecting exercises. And that's really where my fundamental principles are that I use, which is we can look at somebody and we can determine that they're either in a phase of gait or a phase in respiration, and usually a combination of both. And then we can select exercises based on that. So after that collegiate experience, I worked in a sports med clinic for a little bit, where I was now introduced to athletes, business executives, and every chronic pain, everything in between. And now I left there about 2 years ago now, and I work for myself. I started Resilient Training and Rehabilitation Incorporated. And now with COVID, just like a lot of other people, I had to really transition my business just because I couldn't see people in person. So I started Resilient Education as a kind of like a portion of Resilient Training and Rehab, which essentially is an education company talking about my model and how I integrate that into working with clients from all spectrums. So basically that education company is really talking to or communicating to trainers and rehab professionals on basically how to use exercise or how to be more strategic in your exercise selection. Because we're not working with people in person, we now don't have the luxury of assessing them, using our hands or kinesthetically helping them through movements. So what I had to do was completely change how I assess people and how I cue and program, whether it's pain or whether it's, training, because now instead of, again, like I said, using my hands to help guide them, I had to put more constraints into their system or into their program, such as like using a box or using heels elevated or toes elevated, in order to make sure that I don't have to cue too much or I'm not over cueing. And so, so now I'm kind of working online. I'm doing, I'm kind of back to my in-person clients, but I'm also doing consulting online and doing the Evolve mentorship and a couple other things. So it's something I'm really passionate about. So that's kind of, I guess, my arc.
So I have just a couple of follow-up questions on that. I'm curious, was it hard for you to make the transition from wanting to go to the NHL and into the more of the coaching and rehab facilitator? Was that a hard transition? And then the second question was, I'm curious about the facility that you were working at in terms of the facility where they were training business executives and everyday clientele, and also training people that are working on a collegiate level. So I'm curious how they were able to attract that type of clientele. What was the common thread? Because they seem like two different avatars.
Yeah. So it's interesting because I think when you're a young coach or young therapist, we have this perception that working with professional athletes is like the pinnacle. It is exciting and it's fun, but anybody who has worked will tell you that what you are doing is you are changing their ability, their physical ability or their skill by like 1 or 2%, because the reality is they've already gotten there doing what they're doing. So you going in there saying, okay, hey, we can change this to make you faster or make you more powerful or make your movement more efficient. They look at you saying, look, I'm already here. like just make sure I don't get hurt.
Mhm.
Whereas when you work with more general population or people who are trying to make it to that professional level, to me personally, and it's not for everybody, but for me personally, it's really rewarding because you're able to make significant changes and faster. Professional athletes have these compensatory strategies that they've developed in order to play their sport, right? Whereas, the people who aren't as patterned or aren't as adapted, such as like the collegiate or the young athletes or even the general population, there's a lot more change that can be made and faster.
Mhm.
And so I personally loved that because I worked with professional athletes, I worked with young athletes, I worked with general population, I worked with chronic pain. So I kind of hit every single spectrum that you can possibly hit. And I just found that working with, the population I'm working with, which is business executives, a few athletes, and people in pain, really is rewarding for me because there's nothing better than getting somebody who's had back pain for 10 years, like one of my clients, and all of a sudden he's, he was about to go surgery, and now all of a sudden he's playing golf, he's playing hockey, just like he thought he never would be able to. So for me, like cases like that are super rewarding. Now the transition from, wanting to go to NHL to collegiate, I mean, what I found was as I was kind of working, with younger teams, like younger hockey teams and different facilities that train professional athletes, like I found that I was more connected to, as I said, the younger athletes or the ones that wanted to get to the next level or to Division I or something like that. Like I just found like they were just in there more to get better. Not saying professionals weren't, I'm just saying that I saw changes a lot more with these people than with the professionals. And so that just really made me feel like, yeah, maybe I want to go this route. In terms of the clinic didn't have a lot of collegiate athletes. That was more the university setting. But what the clinic did, which I really, really liked and really, it was something that I was connected with because it's kind of what my thought process was we need a team of people whenever we're working with somebody, right? Like if you're a massage therapist, massage therapists can benefit from having other people work with them just to get different perspectives, because I think anybody can attest to the fact that if you work with somebody for 3-4 years, you may not be able to pick up on certain little changes as effectively because you kind of know their body already. So getting that outside perspective can say, hey, I noticed this. Did you notice that? It's like, I actually did notice that, but I wasn't really like paying attention to it that much. And so it's always great to have this team of resources and team of people working. So they had osteo, they had chiro, physio, they had myself, which actually I kind of brought that service there. I just saw what their model was, which is like, let's have this integrated team of people so that, we can have massage therapists on staff, osteos, chiros, physios, so we can all have different perspectives. And I went in there and said, hey, let me provide the exercise component to this. And that's kind of really where, between that and the collegiate setting, I really found my niche, so to say, which is really, let me assess somebody, and then based on that assessment, I can select a specific exercise rather than giving them 10 exercises. And then the reality is those clients aren't going to do them because they're just going to be overwhelmed and not compliant. So the transition from the professional, like wanting to do professional to, general population, I think that just changed with maturity. I think, as I said, like when you're young, like you want to go professional. And when you get more experienced, I guess, what you do is you start to see that everybody's an athlete, whether like depending on how you look at it. And the way that I look at it is every single person needs the same quality, just different level of it, right? Everybody needs balance. They need power. They need strength. They need mobility. Athletes just need that at a higher extent on certain parts. and it needs to be maybe more specific or adaptable to their sport. Whereas general population person who just wants to be able to do whatever they want to do without pain, that's like the programming is different and the intention is different. And I think it really comes down to the context. I'm like, where am I trying to bring this person? The intention, what are their goals? What are my goals for them to make sure they can achieve those goals? And then I think it comes down to the communication, which is like, is this person going to trust me? And I think that comes into the buy-in, but I think there's more to buy-in than just communication. I think, you need to show results. And, I think buy-in is a mixture between, does that person trust me? Am I communicating my plan to them effectively based on their goals? And am I providing them results?
The results. Yeah, I think that's really key. Like that is a huge point, is that a lot of people miss, is that buy-in comes from trust in, is this person going to take my word for it? And then are they going to do it? And then evaluating the actual result. Like, and I don't mean result in terms of, whether or not it's good or bad. It's not really about what's good or bad. It's about, can you look at the actual result and then make a change, hopefully moving them towards the goal? That's what's going to help with buy-in.
Exactly. It's like when I assess somebody, I think the first part of anybody's assessment really is listening to that person's subjective experience of what's going on, especially pain, right? Pain's interesting. I feel like a lot of people who have pain for a long period of time, they create it as an entity. So let's say I have somebody who's got shoulder pain on their right side, right? We do a movement or something. They refer to it as it. Oh, it didn't like that. Oh, it's really bothering me. Like this part of my body is really bothering me. And they'll put their hand on it and they'll focus on it. And that becomes their reality of, this is the pain. And so the first part is really like, let me hear what your perception is. And that's really what it is, getting their perspective, right? And then after that, it's assessing their body and looking at the movements that are objectively important to me to try to identify not the symptom, but why the symptom could be manifesting. So the root cause of it. Mm-hmm. And then when I'm communicating what I'm doing, I'm always bringing it back to what they said to me subjectively, right? And I think that's where a lot of people miss the boat with an assessment. And I always say this, and something I'm going to be saying in my masterclass next week or October 6th is, our assessment as trainers or physios or rehab professionals, strength conditioning coaches, like our assessment is our sales pitch to the client, right? And it is a genuine sales pitch that basically says, this is what I'm seeing. This is the plan based on what I'm seeing. What do you think? Mm-hmm. They should always feel like they are in control, like they have the keys, because you are making them make the decision. What you are there doing is you are providing information. And what you can do is, based on the objective assessments, maybe you do one exercise that changes something that's related to their shoulder. Now, a subjective experience of pain, like a scale of like 1 to 10, may not be the best approach, because some people just aren't connected with their body very well. Whereas you show them, hey, do you see how your internal rotation of your shoulder wasn't that good? Now look at it. Oh yeah, it doesn't hurt as much when I do that. Or it's going much further, right? Providing that quick little win, I think, is really, really important for their buy-in. So what you're doing is you're listening to them, which everybody likes to be listened to. Mm-hmm. Right? Then you are assessing them and you are explaining what you are doing and why you are doing and how it relates to what they said subjectively. Then you provide an exercise, or for manual therapists, some type of manual intervention that helps improve something to them, again, based on the objective experience, or the objective measurements and the subjective experience. And then at the end, provide them with a plan and saying, hey, based on what we've seen, maybe it could be good if I saw you for the next 2 times a week for the next 2 weeks, and then we can start to phase it off based on how we're feeling, or we can do this. How does that sound? Right? Like, to me, like, that should, it's not, it depends on the context for sure, but that's a great skeleton in terms of like how to systemize your assessment so that it creates buy-in. It provides you as the practitioner with enough information to make a decision. And then that assessment is really where you're going to be making your decisions on your exercise selections, right?
Mm-hmm. I think it's so powerful, and it's really, I really love that we're talking about the assessment, because just for me and my experience and training the, hundreds of personal trainers that I used to work with when I was back in person and as a fitness manager, is that I feel like trainers tend to fall, and I'll speak to trainers specifically because that's who I worked with, but I feel like they fall into one of 3 categories, where they either don't want to assess because they don't see the value in it, or they don't know how to do it, or they assess based on these weekend certifications that we're all taught to do, but then there's no real like rubber meets the road. What am I supposed to do once I've assessed? I just assess because I know I'm supposed to.
Yeah.
And then the third, they assess once and they're like, okay, I did it. And then they never assess again, not recognizing that the assessment is an ongoing process.
Well, that's the reality of it. I mean, I think sometimes you can think of it a few ways, and you're absolutely right. That's exactly what I think in terms of what some of the issues are with assessment. But I think what people need to realize is that every session is an assessment, right? Like, how is this person feeling subjectively? Do they sleep well? Do they, have a fight with their significant other, or does something happen in their life that was stressful? That's going to affect movement. And then maybe picking one movement that you're looking at based on your other measurements that say, okay, this was limited before. Let's see how this is going, right? But yeah, no, I think a lot of people, they don't either know how to assess, as you said, and so what they do is they either don't do it, or they were like me way back when I was still trying to figure things out, which I'm doing like 70 assessment measurements, like just assessing everything. And the reality was I didn't use any of them to make a decision. I was just like, I know I should assess, so I'm going to assess, but I'm not using it. I'm just like, okay, that person's still going to squat, so let's squat. But it wasn't like I was able to now create like a system where I'm like, okay, now my assessment is 8 measurements. That's it, right? Sometimes it can get to 12, depending on the case, right? But 8 out of 70. Because now I've understood how the body works and understand what is actually happening from the inside out of my body in order to be able to select an exercise, which is really like the exercise should be the implement or the tool to get the changes of the objective measurements, right? And then, as you said, people go to certifications and they're taught this new assessment process. And now what they've done is they've thrown out everything that they've learned before and just do this methodology. And what happens with that is then you just follow the algorithm. And then that's where you get stuck, when you see people who defy that algorithm, because you are going to find those people. I mean, when I worked at the neurologic clinic, they defied every science that you can think of, like the people with the stroke, people with the MS. You constantly had to adapt your model and look at outside perspectives. And for that reason alone, that's when I'm like, okay, it can't be super algorithmic. There's got to be some sense of algorithm in your head so that you can actually apply information, because otherwise you're just, constantly just analysis by paralysis, right? Or paralysis by analysis, whatever way that is. But the reality is like, we have to understand, like, first of all, what are like the first principles of movement, right? If we don't breathe and we don't move, our body's going to start to deteriorate, or we're going to die, right? So that leads me to believe that those 2 fundamental principles they relate to every single movement, muscle, fascia, ligament, tendon, whatever it is in your body. Those move based on those two principles. So when I breathe in, everything is relatively externally rotating in a normal human being, right? No compensation, just normal. When I breathe out, it's internal rotation. I have 3 different phases of gait, which, you could probably break down into 3 other phases. So like 6 phases, but in all intents and purposes, we have 3 phases of gait. 2 of them include more of a supinated foot. The other one includes a pronated foot. So now we can look at somebody and say, okay, well, breathing is external rotation if I breathe in, and then they are stuck in a heel strike, which is more supination. Okay, now I can start to select an exercise that maybe brings them more into a mid stance or a pronated position. And so I can improve internal rotation. So now what you can do is you kind of systemize your exercise selection or categorize your exercise selection process based on your assessment, but it has to start with your assessment. Your assessment has to guide what your exercise is, right? So the way that I think of it, and it's kind of, I don't know if you've seen the movie Willy Wonka, but the way that I see it is that if you remember that one scene where Willy Wonka goes and he clicks all these buttons on this machine, which is like a combination of all these different ingredients, and then he pushes a button and it's this one little piece of candy that's a mixture of like blueberry, chocolate, all these different things. That's what I see as the machine being an analogy of the assessment, and then the exercise gets spewed out of that machine, and that is your exercise, right? So rather than saying, okay, I'm going to click the chocolate one, make that candy, then I'm going to click the blueberry one, make that candy, which is commonly prescribed with these 10 different exercises we give people, maybe we have this system in our head where we can say, okay, based on these buttons of the machine that I've selected, this is the exercise that I'm now going to utilize to try to get the change out of 10 different places of the body, rather than just, okay, I'm going to give you this external rotator cuff exercise, and then I'm going to give you this, pelvic tilt. And so I'm going to go after the hip, then I'm going to go after the rib cage, and I'm going to go after this. It's like, let's integrate it together. Let me put you in a position based on where I saw you were limited in your assessment to be able to make the changes that I objectively want and that you subjectively need.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yes. So I'm curious, there's this paradox that I feel that I'm curious to get your perspective on, because it's something that I hear and in what you're saying, meaning, let me give you a tangible example of what I'm talking about. Have you ever seen those memes? It took 10 years to look like I was an overnight success, or, someone said you teach someone how to move and how to do a squat, and now all of a sudden, they want to, squat 400 on their back, right? So of course there is a progression that someone has to go through. But what I am also hearing from you, and what I also know is your superpower, is that you have this ability to look at somebody and shift something and get instant, immediate results in towards, their subjective, what they want, right? So I'm curious, how do you determine what needs to be, a progressive overload in terms of their success in order to see the result that they want, versus you should be able to assess this, create instant change? How do you navigate that?
I think it depends on the person that comes to me and like what their subjective goals are. Like if it's somebody who's got chronic pain, and the people who I see who have chronic pain have seen 5 or 6 different therapists or doctors or whatever. And so they've been referred to me. And so automatically I kind of have some sense of validity and trust, whereas I can kind of do what, not whatever I want, but they're going to trust anything that I say and anything that I do with them. And so for me, what I make my decisions based on is really, again, like I said, my assessment is what I make my decisions based on. But yeah, I think there is that paradox where people kind of look at, let's say like The Rock, for example, and you can see how jacked The Rock is, right? But the reality is like this guy is being paid millions of dollars to have a body like that, right? And he gets up at 4 o'clock in the morning every day and he works out 7 days a week. And the person going to the gym 2 days a week wants that same body, but it's like, well, you don't know all the stuff that he's done and how many years he's done it. You are just seeing the end result rather than the process. And I think a lot of people focus on the end result rather than enjoying the process, because they never really understand, or they really never know where that end result is. It's like, you always search for the horizon. Like, what are you going to do when you get there? Or how do you know you're there? Right. And so where I think, again, like the difference is just the person. Like if I'm trying to get the immediate results, you know, it's really depends on their experience. However, I will say though, that I do try to make immediate results with everybody. So for example, let's say you have somebody who wants to lift 400 pounds on their back, or they already do, right? Like I talk to some power lifters who lift way heavier than I can, but their knees are hurting, their hips hurting, their back's hurting. So what they're doing is they are getting that movement, but they're not getting it with an efficient movement pattern. Otherwise they wouldn't feel pain. They're driving some type of compensatory movement in order to get that load off the ground. So I come in and I say, okay, let me look at your squat, body weight, and then with weight. Because if you have somebody who's squatting 400 pounds, and you say, okay, let's do a body weight squat, and then let's make our assessment based on that, I don't think that you can, because they're only feeling pain when they squat 400 pounds. So you got to look at both. And then from there, again, what phase of gait, what phase of breathing they're in. And, you know, I think, you know, some people get overwhelmed because, like, you know, as you said, like with experience, you're able to spot things out quicker and you're able to like merge things together, rather than when you teach it, you're like, okay, you're going to look at this, then you're going to look at this, and you look at this. Whereas like when you gain experience, you're able to just merge those together all in your head and say, okay, I'm looking at all of this together and I'm moving through it quickly, and then I'm able to select an exercise really quickly. That comes with time. And I think what people need to appreciate is that process, as I said, not the end result of getting there as quickly as possible, but learning something, then applying it a lot, based on your context, adapting it. Because what I do with my people is going to be different than what I would do in a professional setting or in a collegiate setting, because I only have to deal with one person. I don't have to deal with a football team, which I've had to do to basically modify their entire program, because out of 90 athletes, 60 of them got hurt during preseason training. So I'm like, okay, well, we can't go back to that, you know, let's lift heavy barbell back squats all the time. Let's modify it. Maybe we put the weight in front of them. Maybe we do a trap bar deadlift. Maybe we do other things. And in those settings, you can't do an extensive assessment. But the reality is, Bev, is during this pandemic, as I said, I've had to completely shift my assessment. So now what I've done is I do mostly active assessments, which can be translated into a professional setting with multiple people now, a group setting, like a group training class. Because I get that question a lot. It's like, okay, how do I take this and I have 20, 30 people in front of me? How do I categorize the exercise based on where they're limited in movement? Because I can't just focus on one person. And I was like, okay, why don't you select one measurement? And then from that measurement, like, okay, like let's say it's a toe touch maybe. Hey, who can touch their toes? Half people raise their hand. Who touched to their knees? The other half. Okay, you guys are both doing squats. You just may do it this way. You just may do it that way. And now what you're doing is you're creating pods, and you're creating a community within the group based on similar movement patterns. And now you can say, okay, all those people who have their heels elevated versus their toes elevated versus front foot or rear foot elevated, like now you're able to quickly manage the room because you've now bucketed people, so to say.
Mhm.
Does that answer your question? I think I kind of forgot what you said.
No, it
Just
does.
on a tangent, yeah.
No, it does. We were, it's interesting because I know for me, I was just thinking about my context and my experience is that I would assess someone and then all of a sudden be like, well, it didn't happen the way they said it was going to happen in the certifications. So I guess we'll just keep trying. And then it was like, how do you determine what is insanity, meaning just do the same thing over and over expecting a different result versus, well, versus, oh, we need time, we need practice, we need, whatever the case may be, because someone's not going to lose 400 pounds overnight or put 400 pounds on their back. But it was just interesting because I didn't know, when I was first training, how to navigate that, whether or not I should have gotten results and instant results towards their goal based on what they said, or if it was time.
I'm always under the impression that, or I like to undershoot things so that everything's a win. Do you know what I mean? So it's like, because the thing I can't stand more than anything is losing, right? Not that I'm super competitive. I mean, I kind of am competitive, but what it does, it says, okay, like based on the information that I have or do not have, I'm going to make this prediction. Now, there's a great book that I just read. It's called Thinking in Bets.
Mm-hmm.
And essentially what she says, and she basically wrote a book about, she's a professional poker player, and she wrote a book about how to make decisions. And she's saying that we can never be 100% accurate. We can only have a higher probability of a successful outcome. And that's what I try to do with the assessment, is saying, okay, I'm selecting these 8 measurements, and through these 8 measurements, I'm going to have a higher probability of success with that. Now, how I communicate with the client is I say, hey, I'm going to assess this. And then after that, what we're going to do is we're going to play around with a couple of exercises, and we're going to see what exercises get the best change, right? And it could be super, super small, or it could be great. But now what we're doing is, again, it comes down to, are you providing them with a plan, a course of action, saying, hey, 400 pounds, you want to lose 400 pounds, or you want to put 400 pounds on your back? Well, there's progression, just like with everything. But what we're going to do is we're going to, as you said before, constantly assess, and maybe it's every day we assess. So we have these process goals, then we have outcome goals, maybe monthly or weekly. And we can say, hey, how are we progressing? Okay, maybe based on this, we might have to change this, or we're able to jump 50 pounds because you're just doing it so well and it's become easy quickly. Mm-hmm. It really depends on the person's experience. Have they exercised before? Or have they, or haven't they? And if they haven't, then initially you may see that you have quick results at the beginning, right? But then it slows down a little bit. But that's where you kind of like, okay, I expect there's going to be this little, this plateau. So I'm just going to create a different implement to do that. Whether that's progressing the exercise or whether that's changing the exercise. But I think it really does have to do with your conversation with the person and setting expectations with that person. Just like with everything, it's like, if the person is expecting, this magical result, right? Like they've had pain for 10 years. I get this all the time where people are like, hey, I've had pain for 10 years, one session, maybe we've reduced their pain by 75, 50%. They're like, what the heck? I'm not cured yet. It's like, well, you've had this for 10 years. What are all the things that you've done in the past 10 years? We have to peel those back. And for some people, like, you can get it right away. You can get the change right away. With others, it could be a slower burn. And with others, it's maybe a little bit in between. But I think it's setting expectations. Hey, we are going to try some things out. Let's see what happens. Based on your assessment, we're going to try this. Hey, how'd that feel? I didn't really feel it. Okay, that may be too progressive for you. Or we may have to try that again so you can understand where you should feel this, right? I'm doing a squat. I shouldn't be feeling in my knees. should be feeling my quads, my abs, my glutes, right? Like all these different things. I should be able to open up my upper back so that I'm able to shift my weight into my heels, right? Like it's really contextual based, but again, I think it's setting expectations and saying, we have a plan, we have a process. What do you think? Client buys in, and now they're not super frustrated that they're not getting the results tomorrow.
Yes, it is so important. Is that I also, what I really loved about it, which is why I just think it makes the assessment that much more important, is that you have an action plan, and you also have based on the assessment, and you can manage expectations based on an assessment instead of just throwing spaghetti at the wall. Because when we're dealing with outcomes, and this is true in business too, is that, or really just anything in general, is that there are only a certain amount of things that we can control. We can create that, we can assess, we can guess, test, and assess is always what I say, right? Is that, but we just need to know what we're doing in order to make that happen. And then you're going to just you're going to deepen that bond with your client, that buy-in, because you can say, this is what I thought was going to happen and it didn't. So here's what we're going to do instead.
And I think you're spot on with something that I think a lot of people forget, is that if we actually think about things from a systems perspective, like our body is a system, business is a system that follows certain principles, everything is cross-disciplined, right? Like everything is, you look at business, you look at psychology, you look at, whatever, like the health industry, you look at, all these different organizations, they all follow a certain principle, which is we need to assess something in order to understand what our key performance indicators are. And then we are going to execute, this exercise, this strategy, this way of marketing, this way of supplying, or whatever it is. And then we're going to go back, okay, then we're going to reassess and say, hey, did that get the outcome that we were expecting? No. Okay, let's try a different way.
Yes.
So everything is connected. And I think, when I was younger, I wish I did this more, which was learn outside of my industry. Because what you're able to do is you're able to create patterns. However, you still have to understand, I think Greg Hawthorne was, I listened to his podcast with you, and he said you have to understand anatomy and physiology and basically how the body works. Like that's the first thing you have to do, is understand functional anatomy, which is not dead guy anatomy, which is somebody who's like a cadaver on the table, and you pull a muscle and says, okay, you pull a bicep, say, okay, this muscle flexes the elbow. It's like, well, the reality is it also does other things like internally rotate, externally rotate, because every muscle is triplanar. But you're creating this pyramid, so to say, where you understand the foundation and then start to learn things outside of your industry, because that's able to you're able to start creating patterns of saying, oh my gosh, like this is why this person has this kind of posture. Because you look at stress physiology, you look at neurology, you look at endocrinology, you look at all these different systems, you're like, oh my gosh, like this is why this person has it. Or this could explain at a deeper level. And then now you get to a point when you're assessing, you're completely thinking in terms of a system and saying, okay, my assessment is to understand what that body is presenting with, what strategy or what pattern they are outputting, so to say. I'm going to provide an input, which is an exercise, manual therapy, foam rolling, whatever it is, breathing, walking, changing their environment, which is like, go sit in a quiet room and listen to some classical music or something or go meditate. You've created an input to change that pattern that body has. And when we're just reassessing, saying, hey, did we make a favorable adaptation or favorable output? Because in our context, we can only look at the body through movement. That's our lens. Mm-hmm. You go to a psychologist, they're going to look at, understand like your your behaviors and your mind and stuff like that. Whereas we are looking at the movement. And so we have to base our decisions based on movement. And the deeper we go into physiology and the deeper we go into these cross disciplines, we're able to be more effective and more strategic in our decision making. Because that's all it is. Like, you look at a lunge and I look at a lunge, we may be looking at two different things. Not one is better than the other. It's just two different things. But the more you know, the more you're able to say, okay, that person needs to hold that ipsilaterally. That person needs to hold it in their other hand. That needs to be held in a goblet. You know, that person needs to do a row. That person needs to do a press. Like, you're able to be like, okay, I now know based on all this line or all this train of thought that I'm going to select this exercise because of, you know, all these different things. Mm-hmm. You're absolutely right. I get so many questions saying, hey, like, I have a person with back pain or neck pain, or this person who wants to, whatever, get faster or something. Like, what would you do? It's like, I don't know. That's such a broad question. It's like, well, what do their systems look like? You know, like, who are they? What do they want? What is their goal? Is that just your goal, or is that their goal? I think it's another thing. It's like, people learn things and they're like, hey, this is interesting to me. Client does not care, right? And the other thing too, I guess, if we're going on that, and again, this might piss some people off, that's okay, but have you ever, I can't remember where I heard this, but somebody asked me, not me personally, but just said it out there. They said, has anybody ever asked you what certifications you have? It's like, no, clients do not care. What they care about is results. So if you're going to a certification because you need the ticket to be able to do what you want to do, or you are trying to get certain information from that certification, great, go do it. But if it's to have letters behind your name, people don't look at those letters and be like, oh, cool, what are those letters behind your name? The only people who do that are people within our industry. They look at it like, oh, it's cool. You did this system. You did this system. It's like, clients don't care. Clients care. Are you a nice person? Do you care about what I have to say? And are you going to help me? It's like, nope. Anything else, right?
So true. And in fact, I was going to bring this up because it's something that you were talking about. Two things that I think are really important that you do unconsciously, because you're unconsciously competent in this, that I think a lot of people miss, which is that we forget that we're tribal humans, right? And that we get into dogma all the time. But the faster that you can let that go, right? It takes courage, it takes confidence, and it takes skill to go look at other industries, right? I know for me, I'll just speak for myself, is that when I would get into dogma, it spoke more to my own insecurity than it did to my skill, which is, a lot of people get into that trap. It was really Kyle Kyle Dobbs, our mutual friend, who really helped break that context for me. He said, you know, there's just, it all works and it all matters. It's about putting it through your context and putting it through how you are going to make it work for your client.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly.
And once you can let that go, right? And that's going to take a sense of, letting go of your ego, which is hard to do. That's hard.
It's very hard. And I think the other thing too, it's kind of alluding to it. It's like, understand the fundamentals of the body, how it moves, the physiology, the anatomy, breathing, gait, all these different things. And then, take the certification that you need to do in order to practice, right? Then after that, go search, go seek out people, go ask questions. Like, I talk to, on a regular basis, almost daily, I talk to Katie, I talk to Greg, I talk to Chris, right? I talk to Kyle, I talk to a lot of people all the time. And I'm not like, and because of that, that's, they bounce ideas off me, I bounce ideas off of them. But like, to have those people, they prevent you from going through or being stuck in the dogma. Because what you need to do, and it doesn't matter how uncomfortable it is, you need people to question what you're doing, always. Because then you're never going to get stuck. And again, when you work with different people, every person is different and requires different needs. And if you are kind of staying stuck and you're going linear rather than bouncing diagonal or going all these different directions based on who you're talking to, then I think that's where you're going to run into some problems. The reality is, Bev, is that everything that we are saying now in terms of how the body moves, it's not that the other ways were bad. It's just we have more information about things. And so now we're able to implement things more effective rather than, guessing.
Mm-hmm.
And as I said, it's more about we have a higher probability of success, but 10 years, the stuff that we're thinking about is probably going to be as they were thinking, about bodybuilding and stuff like that, was like isolated movements are the way to go. And then we have functional, thing, and then kind of go back to a merger of both of them now. And, but that's just it. It's just like, you just need to reach out to people. You need to be mentored by people.
Yes.
I used to listen to podcasts all the time. And, I remember I was taking PRI, and I was just mind blown by the things that they were doing, but it was very hard to implement. So like I was just amount of reps. Like I would try things on people that had worked with me for a long period of time, who were trusting in me, who allowed me to do it. I worked on friends, family, like all these different people to try. And then I would talk to people constantly. And I would reach out to people. I would meet with people for coffee if they were in town. I would hop on a Zoom call. I would do a mentorship. I would do, whatever it is, so that I was able to absorb as much information as possible, but from people who were doing it. Because it's no different than saying, okay, I'm going to read 100 research papers. Like I'm going to go into the back of a book and I'm going to look at all their research articles and then try to read them, try to filter through them. But they've already done that. Mm-hmm. And I'm reading the book based on what all the information that they've gathered. And it's no different than being mentored by somebody or doing a mentorship, because the reality is that's what they're doing. They filter the information for you, and they've said, this is what works.
Yes.
Don't worry about this stuff. Save some time, because I wasted a lot of time learning things that weren't important or that I used. And then so it's like, okay, now you have somebody who's going to tell you what is important to focus on.
This is why, networking and mentorship is the most important thing. It's something that I will never, ever let go of. I will always have a mentor, because I want to learn from somebody who's doing it, who's in the trenches with me. B, I want that community, because, and especially right now in this time of COVID, where we're not in gyms, it gets really easy to feel isolated, and multiple ideas, multiple minds, I think is so valuable and important. Plus, I look at people at the top, right? Success leaves clues, and they all have their network of people that they grew up together, and their businesses grew together based on their collaborations and based on the things that they did together from the beginning. And also I feel like lots of people get stuck in this, like, oh, but I don't want to copy, or I don't want to steal clients, or I don't want to, all of that insecure stuff that can sometimes come up. And I feel like there's plenty, like you said, there is, there's plenty of clients out there for everybody, and that you're going to have your people that resonate with you, and Katie's going to have her people that resonate with her. And it's not about, either or, it's about all as much as possible.
Yeah. And I think the cool thing is, I was talking to Kyle about this a couple of weeks ago, Kyle Dobbs. It was like, we were saying how amazing the abundance of information there is now, in terms of like, I wish that there was as many mentorships back in the day as there is now, because now you have the people who have been in the trenches, who have tested, who have reassessed, and who have said that this is what is working. This is a more effective way of doing things. Now you have an insight as almost like being like a fly on the wall into what somebody does. And like, I wish I had that, but now it's an abundance amount. And eventually what's going to happen is like, with the same as everything else, is like, you then have to decide, and you have to say, who do I resonate with? Who do I connect with? Like, has this person worked in the same context as me, and like all these different things, because now we're going to have information where we don't have to just go get information or certification from the big companies. Now it's like you have the people who have taken all those courses or spent all that time reading, such as myself, or, like for me, there was one year where anytime I was in the car, which I was seeing clients at their house, I didn't listen to music. I listened to a podcast, audiobook, whatever it was, so that I can continue to improve. And now that's kind of an extreme, but I was just in that mindset that until I get to the age of 30, I'm really learning and processing things. However, what COVID has done is COVID has kind of progressed that a little bit further and say, hey, like I'm doing these things and people could keep on asking me like what I'm doing. Like maybe I'll start posting. And for me, I'll say this, I didn't post for a few years on purpose because I wanted to make sure that what I was saying, I had a thorough understanding and I could justify anything that I was putting out there. And not feeling emotional about people attacking, if they don't agree with me or stuff like that. Because I think some people get emotional about that. Like for me, hey, let's have a discussion. Like, why do you disagree? Why do you agree? And I didn't want to post anything until I had my, I guess, model or the way that I do things structured and, put together. That's why I held off rather than putting things out there. And then I, scroll down and like, oh, 3 weeks ago, like I'm contradicting myself because I still don't have my theories or my mindset or my system in place. So now what I've done is I'm presenting out what like my fundamental system is or my foundational system, and that's going to change, but my system is not going to change. Just the things that kind of, the way that I do things might change, but the way that I think about things might not perturb too much, right? And, what I suggest to anybody is just put yourself out there. Like it's like, check your ego at the door. Like you're going to mess up and you're going to learn from those mess ups. Like I didn't get results with some clients because I didn't have, it was either a confidence thing where I didn't think that I could. So, you not that you aren't trying, but like, you don't feel like you can. So like, you don't, your effort is not 100% there, I guess you could say, if that's, maybe that's a wrong way of saying it, but you know what I mean? It's just like, you don't feel confident. And so, and then it's like, again, there is kind of an ego. It's like, I think, in our industry, it's like, every single person has something to say about everybody else. It's like, well, that person doesn't know anything. That person doesn't know anything. It's like, well, the body is so complex that everybody is right. There's just people who have a better understanding of the body, so they may be more effective, but not that anybody else is wrong. And I think that we need to, as an industry, be better at that, because I think people attack each other too much rather than saying, hey, this person is just trying to put themselves out there and trying to educate people and trying to help. And whether it's right or wrong, we shouldn't be bashing people. We should be saying, hey, I really appreciate you doing that. Or if you don't agree with it or you want to understand why, private message them. Don't blast them.
Yeah.
In front of everybody. And I don't know, I think it's, I think that we're very lucky as an industry that so many people are coming forward and starting to present and mentor people. And I'm happy that, some people have found value in doing or taking my Evolve mentorship course. Because what I try to do is really, put out my model and create great connections. I mean, my favorite part about the mentorship is meeting people from all over the world and understanding where they're coming from and what their knowledge is, because I learn from them just as much as they learn from me. And I think that's important, is we should never be too high up from other people. It's like everybody is trying to accomplish the same thing, get the best results for their clients, and and I think as an industry, I think we're probably geeks at it too. Like we're nerds at it. Like we love it. We love the in and outs of things. But if we can take that and then now say, hey, this is how I communicate it to my client, because they may not necessarily care about the X's and O's, then we become more effective therapists and coaches.
Yeah, I think that's so powerful. And I also, you said something that I live my life by, which is that you're either going to get the success that you want or the lesson that you need.
Yeah.
And everything happens, and you're either just, and for me, it's not about, avoiding failing. It's how can I fail faster? Because that's where I'm just going to learn. I'm going to learn and learn.
Yeah. I think it's also being a good listener. I think a lot of people like to talk,
Mm-hmm.
not talk bad about people. That's not what I'm saying. I just mean like, I've seen so many times where, even just going into like a, big box gym and working out, and you just kind of like, sometimes I'll pause my headphones just to hear the conversation between like a trainer and a person. And all you hear is the trainer talking the entire time.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, it's just ask an open-ended question, just let them talk.
Mm-hmm.
Because the reality is, Bev, and I think I've talked about this with Alina, but we are not certified in this, but we are cognitive behavioral therapists. We are not certified, but every time we talk to somebody, we influence their behavior. If I talk to you aggressively, you are going to feel, that there's a threat. If I talk to you very kindly, you're going to feel, okay, like I can start to like relax. I can trust this person. I can communicate with this person. And so I think the reality is like we influence a lot more than just physical ability or physiology. Like we have to appreciate the fact that, we need to listen more rather than not. Because the people who don't listen are the people who are more insecure. Because and listening to people, that might go against what their preconceived notion is of something. And then that's when they start to feel threatened. Their ego starts to feel threatened because they may not know as much as they think they do.
Correct. And I've been there. And so I'm really grateful for that, because now I know what that feels like.
Yeah.
I know that then I know that that's my work. I need to look inward.
I've always tried to find working opportunities, like my jobs, where I'm working for somebody who is much, much smarter than me and who is more experienced, so that I'm able to just absorb as much knowledge as possible and just watch them and just listen to what they say, listen to how they say it as well, which is also very important. And just like look at how they react to certain situations. How do they program? Yes, that's important. How do they assess? Yeah, you're able to have them as kind of like your soundboard as well as an indirect mentor. And, putting yourself in those situations are huge for your success, but that's also allowed me to put my ego in check, because well, everybody knows a lot more. There's always people that are better at things that you're not good at. Mm-hmm. And so if you self-reflect and acknowledge the fact that there's certain parts of you, your ability professionally or personally, that are not there, go seek out people who you want to be like. I think Sean Light said something like, take like exactly kind of like what I said, is like reflect on your career. And if you want to be like somebody, go find that person and learn from them. Mm-hmm. I am blessed by the fact that a lot of my clients are very successful entrepreneurs. And when I decided to go work for myself, I just put out a couple questions. Like I would go and have coffee with them. I would go and have dinner with them just to ask. And then just watch how they communicated about certain things whenever we were talking in a session, just how they talked, how they responded. And it was just, that's allowed me to really kind of like watch how they communicate and, how successful people, both personally and professionally, act and what their behaviors are like and how they got to where they are. I think, just go out and put yourself out there and just ask the person that you look up to, Do you have any advice? How did you get to what you're doing? And that's what's great about podcasts is you can listen to people that you admire talk and say, okay, this is kind of like what this person was doing. So it's kind of like, taking them out to a coffee because you're listening to kind of the stuff that, what they went through. And that really helped me a lot, is listening to people's perspectives and their arcs so that I could, be able to, avoid certain pitfalls that they may have gone through, that I see myself kind of going that way. So I kind of diverge a little bit and educate myself in things that are important.
Yes. I love this. No, Alex, this has been incredible, and I want to be very mindful of your time. So where can I send people who are interested in learning more about you and learning about services you offer?
So I have my website, which is www.resilientedu.com. You can find me on Instagram. I'm pretty active on Instagram at alex.effer, which is my first and last name. And I have a actual masterclass coming out on October 6th at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, where I'm kind of talking about my assessment process and how I've adapted it to the virtual world. Because the reality is like we've been forced to go online from our assessment. So really just kind of how I transitioned and the way that I view it, and how I've adapted to it. And then you have me my Evolve mentorship as well. It's coming out October 12th. So those are really the main places that you could find me. And feel free to reach out. I'm always happy to have a chat with new people.
I love that. All right. And we'll definitely make sure that we link all of this in the show notes.
Yes. Amazing.
Great. Thank you so much, Alex. I really appreciate your time.
Thanks for having me. I had a great time.
Thanks so much for hanging out with us today. If you liked that video, please go ahead, hit like, hit subscribe. And if you haven't already, tap that bell to be notified when the next video comes out, and I'll catch you on the next one.